the Liberals have said they're not going to release the names on the Duchesne
Yep.
Committee. And why do you think that is? Because so many of them are Liberal supporters.
Tell everybody what the Duchesne Committee is, because I think
The Duchesne Committee was a Brian Mulroney appointed committee to find out how many Nazis, former Nazis, Canada allowed into Canada after the Second World War as a result that they could help us in the Cold War. This is perpendicular to the Paperclip Commission, the Operation Paperclip in the United States, which allowed a lot of Nazi rocket scientists and other people into the country because it was deemed politically necessary because they were anti-communist. A lot of the people revealed in the Duchesne Committee are Nazis, former members of the Waffen-SS especially, who we invited into Canada because they were deemed to be anti-communist and safe. Now, Trudeau does not want these names released. Brian Mulroney did not want these names released. Why? Because there's so many Ukrainian Canadians and others who vote for Liberals and vote for Conservatives today, and whose descendants don't want that information released because it's politically embarrassing. I find this disgusting. I'm a Ukrainian Canadian. People say, you're kidding, because I oppose the war in Ukraine. I oppose the tens of billions of dollars that have gone to Ukraine. But I want the truth out in terms of who. I know it wasn't my family. My father came here he was born Canadian. His father came here in the 1920s, long before the Second World War. But I would like to know how many Ukrainian Canadians are in this country because the government let them in. This is a complete disgrace. And Justin Trudeau is covering this up right now. He's covering up the whole, just like he's covering up everything else, because it's an embarrassment to his despicable regime.
They're now revealing that they're going to keep the names of two witnesses to give secret evidence on China meddling to foreign interference inquiry. They've been holding their inquiries now. Let's say history repeats. And they're going to not disclose certain information for 99 years, I think, to protect the witnesses. And so in as much as they don't want to reveal the names of how many Nazis Canada let in parallel with Operation Paperclip, which was the operation through which the West was taking Nazi scientists to help them with NASA and all that other stuff. It's repeating history yet again. I want to put the blast on the joke, because this all started with whether or not the Conservatives are any better than the Liberals, Pierre Poilievre's cowardice. But when I saw Raquel Danko's hypocrisy when she was grilling Lauren Chen like she's a criminal, like a convicted criminal, when she is not even a named defendant, I really got the feeling that on the one hand, this shows that the Conservatives are Liberals light, or Liberals just driving at the speed limit, but also that the Conservatives might have something to hide as relates to actual Chinese interference in Canadian politics as well. Tell me if my inkling of my spidey senses are tingling right.
I found it absolutely fascinating that Pierre Poilievre agreed to the Bloc Québécois. And I consider the Bloc Québécois to be a treasonous party. I say that all the time.
Let me explain that to the American audience, because they might not appreciate the nuance of what you're saying. Canada has its provincial and federal composition, sort of like America has the federal and states. And there's one equivalent of a state, that being Quebec, that wants to separate, or that has a political movement built on the idea of Quebec separating from Canada. So it'd be like California seceding from the Republic of these United States of America. There's a federal political party called the Bloc Québécois, whose stated objective is to separate from Canada. So they are a federal party whose objective is to remove Quebec from the federation of which they are a federal party. So it would be like California or a state having a federal representative who's in the federal government, but only to separate that state from the federal government.
The Bloc Québécois suggested, what do we do about this conundrum of who are the Chinese spies? We'll kick it upstairs to the Hogue inquiry, which is still going on right now under Justice Hogue. It's an inquiry into whether or not Canada knew about foreign interference. The Bloc Québécois, which I say, it really has no business making recommendations on this, suggested this question be kicked upstairs to the Hogue inquiry. The Liberals, the government said, great idea. The official opposition Conservatives said, wonderful, we approve of this. And I said at the time, why do you want to kick this upstairs? Obviously, you've got something to hide. Within months, the Hogue inquiry came back and said, we are in no legal position to reveal the names in this report.
The names of Canadian parliamentarians who are currently sitting in Parliament, who have been either compromised, at risk of compromise, compromised or unwittingly compromised by Chinese interests or Chinese interference. Those are the names that they refuse to release.
Precisely.
Sitting members of Canadian Parliament.
Sitting members and former members in the House of Commons and the Senate. The whole inquiry said we can't release these names because it's beyond our legal parameters to do so. And so they basically put the ball back in the court of the journalists to say, I can't believe we're putting up with this in Canada.
And it's not, I mean, they couldn't be sanctioned without their identities made public or known. So they are actually sitting there, unsanctioned, currently representing, I don't know who they're representing, but currently sitting as members of parliament. Do we know what type of interference are we alluding to, or do we know that we're talking about right now?
No, we don't know exactly what they did or what they got in return. This is what makes this so maddening. There's so many issues that are arising out of this. We know that there was political interference in terms of helping MPs win elections. But we don't know is that how many MPs? There's 11 people on the list, which has never been released. What did they get and what did they have to do for what they got? What did they have to give to China or these other foreign influencers who are always sort of secondary? What did they have to do to get that quid pro quo? The Canadian media seems absolutely unreluctant to find out the answer. And I find that completely disgraceful.
Do we know any of the names? I understood maybe that 4 names had been disclosed, and 1 of them was conservative, 3 were liberal.
We have the only name that is possibly indicted in this, and it's the report apparently says this was an unwitting response is a transit minister, Ang. I don't know, and she has denied the allegation. She said it's completely untrue. There's only one reporter in Canada who's really devoting his full time on this, is Sam Cooper, who does a lot of research on this. I sent you a couple of stories from Sam. He is doing some really good research on this. But nobody else in the parliamentary press corps wants to ask the questions. And I tell you, nobody in the government or the official opposition wants to talk about this.
It is amazing that they don't even see the political opportunity to talk about it. Like the only reason conservatives would not be making hay over this and subpoenaing people to testify instead of Lauren Chen is because it implicates them. There's no other plausible explanation.
What fascinated me, there was a parliamentary report released just before Thanksgiving about how the Canadian Security Intelligence Service told the government that there were 2 Chinese spies working at the Winnipeg microbiology lab. Mm-hmm. This is a top secret lab. This is a national lab which they've hidden away in Winnipeg. Few people were aware that it was there. There were 2 Chinese scientists working at this lab, and I've got to pronounce their names. Xiao Chu, Professor Dr. Xiao Chu, and her husband, Dr. Qi Ding Cheng, were working at this lab in Winnipeg.
What was the lab working on, if I may ask? I know the answer.
The lab was working on Ebola in discovering how Ebola could be used or how Ebola could be manufactured. This is incredible information. Now, 7 months before these 2 were sent back to China, they were committing espionage. Nobody in Canada wants to talk about this, but they were sent back to Canada because they were spying for the Chinese government. They were sending back documents and material from the Winnipeg lab to the Chinese army, the People's Liberation Army. This is all well documented. And even Pierre Poilievre got upset about this when this information was released. CSIS warned the Canadian government about this 7 months in advance. Nothing was done until 7 months later, these 2 were quietly removed from their posts and sent back to China.